that's available in our software. Okay, there are a couple of different options here. I'm actually going to default my settings back to what they were when I started the webinar a few minutes ago, just so we can start from the very beginning. So bear with me just a minute. Okay. So starting from the very beginning for our time tracking, the first thing that you'll want to do to verify that you have all of the correct things turned on or all of the correct changes that may need to be made to your agency's system in order to utilize that time tracking option, we'll need to go to Administration and then choose Company Settings. You have several tabs across the top of your screen here in Company Settings. In order to get to the time tracking options that we have available, you're going to click on Components, and the very first option at the top of this sheet is going to be Timesheets. You have a drop-down box here. Now mine is currently set to Do Not Use, and you'll notice up here at the very top I don't have any extra icons to track the time or to be able to add in a new timesheet. What I'm going to do is actually change my timesheet option to Log In and Log Out. That way we can look at that first option that we have available. And I'm going to click Submit. Now the system is automatically giving me an alert here, just letting me know that I need to log out and log back in order to view those changes. So I'm going to choose OK. Go to my File tab and then choose Exit to log out. I'm going to log back in using my same username and password. If I could only enter in my username and password correctly this morning. There we go. And you'll notice that now up here at the very top that I've turned on that log in and log out option, I do have a new picture or a new icon that shows up here in my list, and that's going to be this red X. Now it defaults to the red X because when I logged back into the system, since I had that timesheet tracking option turned on for log in and log out, the system automatically logged me in or clocked me in when I logged into the system. This red X would allow me to actually log out of the system or clock out of the system basically. And it'll give me an alert once I click it that tells me thank you for clocking out and also lets me know the time that I was clocking out of the system. I can choose OK. Let's say maybe I was clocking out for a break. When I get back to my computer after my break, you'll notice that my red X that originally was here that said clock out has changed to a green check mark, and now I have the ability to clock back in. Now clocking out won't actually log you out of the system, so remember if you're logging out of the system you would actually go to that File and Exit tab, and that would actually log you out. Just like the clocking out option, when I clicked on that green check mark to clock me back in, the system automatically popped up that separate window right here in the middle of my screen that told me thank you for clocking back in, and it also documented the time that I clocked back in. Now if I wanted to view actually a list of all of those times that I've clocked out and clocked back in, maybe for the previous week, so I can get an idea of maybe what my paycheck's going to look like, I can go to my File tab and then choose Timesheets, and the system automatically is keeping track of those different timesheets. Okay, so I'll see the date here, 6/11. I see my start time, and then my end time is actually open. Now the reason it's open is because I still haven't clocked out, so it's keeping track of all of this time. As soon as I were to clock out for the day, it would actually total up the number of hours or maybe the number of minutes that I was in the system, and I would be able to see both of those columns here on this list. Now I have a couple of other options here, or a couple of other ones from today, from earlier when I was playing around with the clocking in and clocking out option. Let's say maybe this 6:11 was actually a mistake and I was playing around in it because it's new and I accidentally clocked out or accidentally entered in a time that I didn't need. I can find wherever the mistake is, and over to the right-hand side of that row, you'll have two different options. You have a red X, which will simply allow you to delete that particular timesheet entry, and you also have a blue magnifying glass. Now if you click on that blue magnifying glass, that will actually open up your Edit Timesheet Entry page, and that's going to allow you to update that start and end time. You can update your break time if you need to, or the total number of hours. You can choose the category here. Now as a default, the category will default to timesheet. We'll look at some of the different options available here when we actually look at our second option available as far as keeping track of that time. But as you can see, you just have drop-down boxes to actually choose the time here, and then clicking on Submit would just save that updated timesheet entry, and the system would refresh this page and you could see that reflected change here in this list. Again, the red X to the right-hand side is simply going to erase that entry. If you needed to manually go in and make an entry, you can click on this Manual Entry button in the upper right-hand corner of this timesheet page, and that's going to pull up a page similar to the one that we just looked at that's titled Add Timesheet Entry. It'll automatically default to the date that's on your computer's date settings. If you needed to change that, you do have a magnifying glass to the right-hand side. That'll pull up our little calendar screen, and you can choose the date from that calendar. Maybe I forgot to enter in my time, or I forgot to clock in on the 3rd of this month. I can use the drop-down boxes to select my start and end time, and then enter in my break, maybe a lunch break. It's going to automatically total that total number of hours for me, and again it defaults that category to timesheet. Now if I wanted to, since I'm entering this in after the fact, in the description box I could add in a note that says maybe forgot to clock in. And that way when I save that information, it also saves that little description, and then the system will refresh that page for me. And here we see that 6/3 date that I had entered in. Now if we click on the magnifying glass, that'll take us right back into that Edit Timesheet Entry. So if I needed to edit that time, I could edit that information. If not, I can just close that screen. Okay, let's go ahead and look at our second option that we have available now. So to do that, I'm going to go back to the Administration tab and then choose Company Settings again. I'm going to go to my Components tab. Again, my timesheet option is the very first option on this page, and I'm going to change this to our timesheet option and click Submit. Again, it's telling me to log out and log back in to view those changes, so I'm going to go up to my File tab, go to Exit, and then log back into the system so I can see that change. Now you'll notice once I've logged back into the system, instead of having the green check mark and the red X, I now have a little blue square with a clock inside of it, and when I hover my mouse over that option, it says Time Clock. Now the way this Time Clock or Timesheet option can be used is once I log into the system, I can actually click on that time clock, and that'll open up an Add Timesheet Entry page. Now this is something that you can do at the start of the day or at the end of the day. I would probably recommend at the end of the day before you leave. That way you can document maybe a later time if you stayed a little bit later to work on something else, or maybe if you took a shorter lunch break, you can change that break option. Remember, you can always go back in and edit these, but the system automatically defaults to today's date. Use these drop-down boxes that are provided to just select your time in and your time out, and again your break time. The system will automatically total those number of hours that's worked. And then you have your category option, which again defaults to timesheet. Now on this category option, these categories can be customized by the Reference and Attribute tab. Here's the Reference and Attribute tab. The different options that are available here, though, just keep in mind that the only ones that are actually going to pull to that timesheet reference page under File and then Timesheets are going to be the ones that are labeled Timesheet, Holiday, or PTO. Now in our system right now, the PTO time is not accrued, so it's not going to deduct this from the actual PTO box that's in the agent menu. So you would still need to go in and add in or deduct that time or add in additional time when they receive extra time on their paycheck. The holiday will actually pull this time here that you've entered over to that File and Timesheet page for you guys to go back and reference, or if you needed to edit that information. And then again, by default, it defaults to the timesheet option, which will automatically pull that particular timesheet over to the File and Timesheet page for reference. You have your description box here. Click on the Submit button to save that entry. It'll validate your information and give you a little box that tells you that that timesheet was saved. And then it'll close that window once it's finished. It may refresh your screen here. And then again, this button or this icon up here at the top doesn't change. It's always going to look like a blue button here with that clock inside of it if you're using the timesheet option. But again, under your File and Timesheet, you'll be able to see those timesheets that you've added in. So here's the timesheet that I added in from 8 to 5. Now the one that's up here at the very top was when I actually had those settings set to clock in and clock out. So what I'm going to do is scroll over here to the right hand side and just erase that one using the red X. That'll refresh my screen. If there's any duplicates, if you accidentally entered in your time and then forgot that you had entered it in early that morning, red X is going to erase it. The system will automatically refresh that page and keep a running total of all of that information. Clicking on your magnifying glass over to the right hand side, remember, just pulls up that Edit Timesheet Entry page so that you could go in and make any changes to that start date or end date, or I'm sorry, end time or start time. You can also make changes to the break time if you needed to update that, or maybe update the category back to a timesheet. Clicking Submit is going to save that information. The system will update this page. And that's it really as far as clocking in and clocking out and using this timesheet option. Now let's look at kind of how that pulls over into our actual payroll module. Okay, I see some questions are coming in, so we'll look at those at the very end of this video or this webinar. Keep in mind you still have that manual entry button in the upper right hand corner, so if you needed to manually enter in another timesheet from this page, clicking on manual entry is just going to open up your Add Timesheet Entry page for you to document another one. Now under your Payroll tab, You'll notice that you have an option here that says Review or Approve Timesheets. If you select that option, that's going to take you into that Review or Approve Timesheets, and it'll automatically take you to a filter section. You can select your provider or your branch office. If you wanted to filter maybe by the supervisor or by a particular agent, or maybe the last date that you were wanting on that report, you can use those filter options and hit Submit. I'm just running mine actually wide open so I can see all of those timesheets that I've added in. You always still have your filter option, so even after you filter and hit Submit, if you needed to refilter it again, just simply click on that gray bar and that'll open up those filter options. Now each of our employees will show up here under that filter. Again, you can click on their gray bar to actually open up their timesheet entries. And you can see it'll total up the number of timesheets that's in that list. It'll tell you the from date and time, and also the through date and time. Remember, it is going to be military time. It'll also tell you the break that they entered, and then total out the time on that right-hand column. You have a check or uncheck all option at the very top here. You'll notice that that check or uncheck all is available for each particular employee. So I have one here for my first employee, Ramya, and then I have one here for my second employee, Nurse RN. Now if I approve all of these timesheets, I would just simply click Submit, and that's going to basically flag them as approved so that when we run our regular payroll report, we'll see these approved timesheets show up on our list. I can also click on any of these underlined dates and times in the From column to actually access that Edit Timesheet Entry. So if maybe they were entering in the date and you needed to actually update it, or if they forgot to enter in their break, you can enter in the break for them. Click Submit to save that information. Again, it'll give you an alert telling you that it was saved, and then refresh your page for you. As you can see, that'll update that information here. And then again, if you approve all of those timesheets, just make sure that that time or that checkbox is checked, and then click Submit. The system will let you know that they were successfully approved, and you can click OK, and it'll take you right back to your filter page. Now once you've approved those timesheets, under our Payroll tab, when we're going in and actually creating a new payroll, you'll notice one of the filter options for the payroll items is going to be Timesheets. Now we automatically default that approved box as selected, but if you didn't approve those timesheets, or if you didn't approve some timesheets and you wanted to still have all of those, whether approved or not, pull over to this payroll report, just make sure that you change that filter option to say All. Clicking on Create New Payroll is just simply going to run that payroll, and you'll be able to see all of those timesheets versus just the approved ones. So that's kind of how those play into the payroll portion of our system. So let me look over here at the different questions that we have. I'm going to try and make this box a little bit bigger. All right, bear with me just a minute. I'm going to look through. The first question is going to be, how do managers view timesheets, and is there a report? To view those timesheets, you guys can actually go to the Payroll and review and approve timesheets, and this is probably going to be the easiest, quickest way for you guys to view all of those. And you can just click Submit, or you can enter in the created date, as in maybe your date range that you're looking for, or the last date that you would want to pull those timesheets. click Submit, and then that's going to show you all of those timesheets and split them up based on your employees. So that's probably going to be the easiest way for managers to view those timesheets. You just want to make sure that you have access to that Payroll and Review and Approve Timesheets option. And you can give that access to users that would need it or administration that would need it by going to Administration and Groups and then looking at those group settings. Now, if you're not seeing some of these group settings here, again, I think we probably went over some of these in that payroll webinar, but if you go into your group settings, there's a new section towards the bottom that allows you to select whether or not they can approve schedules or timesheets or tasks, and it also has some different options there for payroll. Okay, let me look at these other questions real quick. Okay, I see a question here about the old version of the calendar versus kind of the way that it calculates the overnight shifts. I will probably contact that particular agency regarding that question after the webinar is over, just so I can get a little bit more details and understand maybe what you guys are actually needing. And the last question that I see is, oh, actually another one came in. So the second to last question that I see is, can you make all the timesheet categories pull into the timesheet list instead of only those few, so that nurses can review all of their entries for the day and make sure they didn't forget anything or make any mistakes? Okay, so I want to maybe get some clarification on that particular question. Can you make all the timesheet categories pull into the timesheet list instead of only those few? I'm assuming they're meaning under File and Timesheets, are you wanting to see the actual category listed here on this page? Or are you actually talking about when you select the magnifying glass, being able to see this list of categories here that are available? If I could just get some clarification on that, that'll help me answer that. The next question is a good one. Should the task from online point of care pull into payroll as well? The task from the online or offline point of care program, when they are actually adding in a task, I'm going to pull up a task sheet so that you guys can actually see that. I'm going to choose Add Task. So I'm going to File and Task, and then I'm choosing Add Task. You'll actually have different categories that are listed here. Remember, if you choose that holiday option or PTO, that will pull that information over to your file and kind of timesheet option that you have available. There is a payroll tab. There are a couple of settings that you may need to turn on in order to have that payroll tab, but you can actually pull that information. If it needs to be included on a payroll, they'll have that option to select so that it'll actually pull this time in and time out, and it'll also pull any mileage. If they needed to document any mileage, it'll pull that mileage over. So when you're running your payroll report, you'll actually have your Review and Approve Timesheet option. But some of the options, like let's say your nurse was documenting time spent to drop off labs, so she was entering in a task and selecting her time here using the From and Through option, and then she also was entering in her mileage so that she could be reimbursed for mileage. Under this Payroll tab, you would want to go to Review and Approve Task. And then again, you have your same filter options, and by clicking Submit, that'll actually pull up those tasks. Maybe it was a meeting like this one that they came into the office for, and then you guys can approve those tasks. So they will also pull over to the payroll system if they're adding in a task for that time or mileage that they're documenting. Okay. And I see, okay, I see there was clarification to the question that I had asked earlier back on this timesheet list. So you guys would like to actually see the category showing up here as well. So if they made a mistake, they could tell the difference between maybe what they had entered as a holiday and maybe what they had entered as PTO or just a regular timesheet entry. I think that's a very valid feature request. So I can definitely look into seeing if we could add that here to that page so it makes it a little bit easier for them to access or easier to edit that information. Okay, and I see instead of only timesheet, PTO, and holidays showing up in the file timesheet list, they mentioned that they would want all of them to show up to account for meetings, office time, etc. I'll have to look at that a little bit more. I understand kind of now what you're saying. So we had talked about, just to clarify for everyone out there listening to me, if it's not as clear, me trying to process out loud what that question actually was about. What this particular person is asking is, whenever we had gone into the File and Timesheet tab, I had mentioned that the only categories that show up here in this page are the ones that have this category as either holiday, PTO, or timesheet. And so what they were asking is if some of these other options could also be pulled over here to this page. I think that that's something that we could look into. For right now, the holiday, timesheet, and PTO are really going to be the only ones that are going to pull in here. Any of the other ones are going to be able to pull as kind of a task, and they're going to show up in that task menu. So if they were actually wanting to look at their own task, they could come over to this File and Task tab, and then that's where they could actually see those different tasks. So if it was a meeting that they came in for, or a case conference, or if they were maybe documenting that they were taking the labs or dropping labs off, that would really be documented here in the task sheet to reference, and then those would pull over again, like I had mentioned, under Payroll and Task. We can talk about maybe a little bit more why you guys would want those to show up on the same list before we would look into actually changing that. But for the time being, all of those other different types of categories are going to show up under the File and Task if you wanted to view a list of your own tasks. For anyone in the office, any administrators wanting to view a list of those tasks that would be pulling to Payroll, you could go to Payroll and then Review/Approve Task. And then anything that's a holiday, a PTO, or a timesheet would actually show up under File and Timesheets, and then administrators could actually access that list from going to Payroll and then Review/Approve Timesheets. Hopefully that answers that question for you. Let me see. There is another question that says, when a nurse works a shift in the field, does that create hours over into payroll, or do they manually have to do a timesheet? When a nurse out in the field, or even a therapist out in the field, any type of field staff actually does a visit or does a shift, they actually are documenting that time on their visit documentation, so they do not have to log in and actually create a task or create a timesheet. The only time the timesheet option is going to be used is really for your office staff to document when they get to the office in the morning, when they would actually clock out in the afternoon. It may be used from time to time for your field staff that may come into the office to maybe finish doing their documentation. They could use this clock in, clock out option, or they could use that timesheet option to actually document the time that they were just in the office working and not necessarily the time that they were in the patient's home completing that visit. You may also use the task option for your field staff if they are, like I had mentioned earlier, dropping off labs or something other than a visit that you would want them to be able to keep track of that time and also that mileage that they may be reimbursed for. Okay, let me just scroll through these questions again and make sure that I've answered them all. It looks like there was one more that may have come in. Okay, when exporting an employee's time and also task, will all the information be exported onto one file or on one file? If you're actually running a payroll report in our system, so you've already if you've already reviewed and approved those timesheets or tasks, when you're actually running that payroll, that will actually be grouped together with those different types of visits that they also have done that particular pay period. And the system, when you're exporting that pay file or you're exporting that payroll file into an Excel spreadsheet, they will all be included, I believe, on that one file. There may be, I know with our old payroll, we used to actually have a separate file for the task versus the actual visits that were done. And we need to actually change some of my filter options here because it's not wanting to run that. I may have some filters turned off. But I can just verify for you guys that that would actually now import or export actually onto one file in Excel. And that'll be something that I can email the answer out to all of the people that attended the webinar today. So, and it looks like that is all of the questions here. So hopefully that answered and kind of clarified everything you guys had questions about. If you have additional questions, feel free to call in. Our number is 936-622-4555. We are recording this webinar, so that will actually be available at some point this week. We are working on posting those under our help and support page, and you can actually look for an alert that we'll post in the system to kind of show you where those may be available at. And we are also working on some additional training videos and resources for you guys, so keep an eye out for those and those alerts, and have a good afternoon.